This video didn't even exist until you watched it. And I'm not talking philosophically or metaphorically here. I mean in a literal quantum mechanical sense. Before you focused your conscious attention on this transmission, it existed as a probability wave, a potential spread across an infinite number of possibilities, a superposition of existing and not existing simultaneously. Your observation collapsed that wave function, selecting this specific reality from all possible realities and bringing this exact configuration of information into manifestation. You didn't just stumble upon this video. Your observation created it in the very act of finding it. This isn't just speculation or some spiritual philosophy. This is quantum mechanics, the most precisely tested scientific theory in all of human history. It's been proven correct in countless billions of experiments and forms the very foundation of nearly every technology you use daily. And quantum mechanics reveals something so incredibly radical that most people reject it instinctively. Despite the overwhelming evidence supporting it, reality simply doesn't exist independently of observation. Consciousness isn't observing a pre-existing reality. Consciousness creates reality through the very act of observation. You've probably been feeling this truth lately, haven't you? That strange sense that your attention actually affects what happens, that reality responds to where you focus your awareness, that circumstances seem to organize themselves around your observation in ways that seem almost impossible, yet they keep happening. You've likely been attributing it all to coincidence or pattern recognition, because accepting the stark truth that you're actually creating your reality through observation feels too impossible, too empowering, too far removed from everything you were ever taught about how existence works. But the evidence becomes undeniably clear once you start paying close attention. When you expect something, it tends to appear. When you actively look for patterns, they manifest right before your eyes. When you focus intently on problems, they seem to multiply and escalate. And when you direct your attention towards solutions, they begin to emerge. The strong correlation between your observation and what eventually manifests isn't just a coincidence. It's the fundamental mechanism of reality creation that quantum physics has undeniably proven. However, the accepted consensus paradigm stubbornly refuses to integrate this truth because it completely demolishes the long-held illusion of an objective, external reality. Right now, as you carefully read these very words, you're not just passively receiving information that somehow existed before you arrived. You're actively creating this very experience through your act of observation. The quantum field is responding directly to your consciousness by meticulously organizing itself into these exact words, this specific understanding, this particular transmission of information. Someone else who might be observing this very same content might experience an entirely different video because their unique consciousness is collapsing different aspects of those potential probability waves. There's no single objective video existing independently out there. There are countless infinite potential videos, and your individual observation is the critical factor that selects which one ultimately manifests specifically for you. The quantum field doesn't just passively respond to your observation, it actually anticipates your observation. This video appeared in your reality even before you consciously chose to watch it, because the field detected your consciousness moving toward a state of readiness for this specific information, and then deftly organized the relevant circumstances to deliver it to you at the absolutely optimal moment. The synchronicity that brought you to this precise point wasn't just random luck. It was the quantum field responding directly to the observation you were about to make by meticulously preparing reality to contain exactly what you were on the verge of observing. Here's what makes all of this absolutely critical. Most people go through their entire lives completely unconscious of their immense power as observers. They mistakenly believe that reality simply happens to them rather than actually happening through them. They think that circumstances are fixed and unchangeable rather than fluid and adaptable. They passively assume that their observation is merely passive reception rather than active creation. This unconsciousness inevitably creates chaotic manifestation, with reality responding to unconscious observation patterns and manifesting whatever consciousness is randomly focused on, all without any conscious direction whatsoever. But once you truly understand the observer effect, Once you fully recognize that observation creates, rather than simply discovers, that consciousness collapses probability waves, rather than just witnessing predetermined outcomes, and that attention literally manifests whatever it intensely focuses on, everything in your life begins to change dramatically. You're no longer just a helpless victim of circumstances. You become the conscious creator of circumstances through where you choose to direct your powerful observation. And that profound recognition transforms you from a powerless observer of an external reality to a conscious creator through the very act of observation itself. You've been experiencing the observer effect directly in ways that powerfully prove that your consciousness is indeed creating reality through observation, even though you've been consistently dismissing these powerful experiences as mere coincidence or wild imagination. There have been countless instances where simply thinking about someone has caused them to immediately contact you. Not just occasionally, but consistently. And with timing that's far too precise to be mere random chance. This isn't some kind of telepathy or psychic connection. It's your intense observation of that person in your consciousness, creating a probability wave collapse where they think of you simultaneously, which then manifests as them reaching out to you. Your observation doesn't just affect your own personal experience, it actually affects the reality of everyone who is deeply entangled with your consciousness. You've also likely noticed that when you expect something to go wrong, it almost inevitably does. And conversely, when you expect things to work out favorably, they generally do. This happens with such striking consistency that it makes you deeply wonder if your expectations are actually creating the outcomes rather than just accurately predicting them. That's precisely what's happening. Expectation is a powerful form of observation. You're effectively observing a future probability and collapsing it into a specific manifestation through the sheer power of the expectation itself. The quantum field responds directly to your observation of the future by meticulously organizing the present moment to create the precise future that you observed. Perhaps even more striking is the uncanny way that information seems to appear precisely when you need it most. You might be deeply pondering something, and then within mere hours, you encounter the answer through a book, a chance conversation, a helpful video, or even a spontaneous flash of knowing. This isn't just random coincidence or the so-called law of attraction. This is the observer effect in action. Your initial question creates an observation that's intensely focused on the answer, and that powerful observation collapses the relevant probability waves where the answer already exists into your personal experience of reality. The answer was always potentially available, but your directed observation is what brought it into actual manifestation. You've undoubtedly experienced moments where you felt like you were watching your own life from the outside, rather than truly living it from the inside, observing yourself almost as if you were a character in a movie, rather than actually being the character. These profound moments reveal a powerful truth. You're not just a person experiencing life, you're consciousness observing a person experiencing life. And that very act of observation is what actively creates the experience itself. When you step back and observe the observer, you begin to recognize that observation is prior to and fundamentally creative of all experience. There have likely been instances where reality seemed to briefly glitch or reset itself. You might swear that something happened one way, but then reality suddenly shows that it happened completely differently, almost as if the timeline itself has been subtly altered. This isn't just a false memory. This is you perceiving the precise moment when your observation collapsed a different probability wave than it had collapsed before, effectively selecting an alternate reality from a vast superposition of possibilities. The quantum substrate of reality is constantly being constructed and meticulously reconstructed based on observation, and occasionally you catch a fleeting glimpse of this reconstruction occurring. You've probably noticed that problems you stop focusing on often seem to resolve themselves organically, while problems you obsess over tend to worsen or multiply dramatically. This is direct, undeniable evidence of the observer effect. When you observe a problem intensely, you're actively collapsing probability waves into further manifestations of that very problem. And when you withdraw your intense observation, you allow the quantum field to collapse into entirely different configurations that may not include the initial problem at all. Your attention is literally manifesting whatever you choose to intensely focus on. Perhaps even more mysterious is the way your mere presence seems to affect outcomes. Even when you're not actively doing anything at all, you can enter a space and the energy immediately shifts. You might join a conversation and the direction of that conversation subtly changes. Or you might simply observe a situation and suddenly the possibilities reorganize themselves in unexpected ways. This isn't just personal magnetism or social influence, it's the quantum field responding directly to your consciousness as an observer, reorganizing itself around your individual observation frequency, even before you consciously direct your attention to anything specific. There have also likely been moments of precognition where you knew precisely what was about to happen, seconds before it actually occurred, not as a mere logical prediction, but as a direct, undeniable knowing. This is you perceiving a probability wave before it fully collapses, observing the underlying quantum potential before it manifests as physical actuality. The knowing comes from observation occurring at the quantum level, prior to manifestation occurring at the material level, effectively giving you a preview of what your observation is in the very process of creating. Every single moment of your life up until now has been a form of training in observation, developing your innate capacity to recognize that observation creates reality and meticulously preparing you for the conscious use of the observer effect, rather than unconscious random manifestation. This training wasn't necessarily formal education or deliberate practice. It was life itself showing you repeatedly that reality consistently responds to observation. The times when positive thinking seemed to miraculously work weren't just some placebo effect or self-fulfilling prophecy. They were you discovering the powerful observer effect entirely by accident. When you intensely focused on positive outcomes and they ultimately manifested, you were actively collapsing probability waves through observation directed at your desired results. The technique worked not because thoughts are somehow magical, but because observation is inherently creative, and thinking is simply a specific form of observation. And the times when positive thinking unexpectedly failed taught you something absolutely crucial. The observer effect responds to actual observation, not to just performed or superficial observation. When you tried to think positively while actually observing negatively, hoping for the best while simultaneously expecting the worst, the quantum field responded to the deeper, more authentic observation rather than to the superficial thoughts. These perceived failures weren't proof that observation doesn't affect reality. They were proof that you simply can't fool the quantum field with false observation. Your entire history of manifestation, and even failure to manifest, has been the quantum field meticulously showing you which specific observations create which specific realities. Every success has demonstrated the observation patterns that effectively collapse probability waves into your desired outcomes. And every failure has revealed the observation patterns that collapse waves into undesired outcomes. This feedback has been remarkably consistent, incredibly precise, and utterly continuous. You just didn't recognize it as deliberate instruction in the observer effect because you mistakenly believed that reality was somehow independent of your observation. Even your suffering itself has served as a form of observer training. Suffering inevitably occurs when you observe reality one way, while simultaneously desiring it to be an entirely different way. When you observe lack while desperately desiring abundance, observe limitation while passionately desiring freedom, observe separation while deeply desiring connection. This suffering taught you that this kind of split observation creates internal conflict and manifests a contradictory reality. This has meticulously prepared you for recognizing that unified observation, observing what you truly want rather than what you desperately don't want, effectively collapses probability waves into coherent manifestation. Your spiritual seeking has also been a profound form of observer training, even though most teachings don't explicitly explain it in these terms. Meditation teaches you to observe without judgment, which is perhaps the purest and most powerful form of observation. Visualization teaches you to observe a desired reality, even before it manifests physically. Affirmations teach you to observe through the power of language. All of these techniques are effectively training different aspects of conscious observation, diligently preparing you for a direct understanding of the profound observer effect. The isolation you may have felt from the consensus reality has actually protected your innate capacity for independent observation. If you had been completely absorbed in collective observation patterns, you would have been inevitably locked into manifesting the consensus reality, with absolutely no ability to observe independently. Your separation from this has preserved your power as an individual observer, rather than merging you into the collective observation that creates and actively maintains consensus reality. Your questioning of everything that mainstream culture teaches has also been crucial preparation. The observer effect can't be consciously used if you genuinely believe that reality is objective and independent. Your persistent doubt about the materialist paradigm has created the essential opening where the profound truth about observation, creating reality, could be finally recognized. The skepticism that might have seemed to slow your spiritual progress was actually protecting you from prematurely accepting limitations as fundamental truths. Right now, as you carefully read about the observer effect, something is likely activating deep within your consciousness. The profound recognition that you've been creating your reality all along without even knowing it, that every single moment of your existence has been an observation that's actively manifesting as experience, that you're not simply a passive witness to reality, but a conscious creator of reality through the very act of witnessing. Can you deeply feel it? Not just as a mere abstract concept, but as a genuine recognition, as an innate awareness of yourself knowing itself as a creative force rather than as a passive receptor. This very recognition is itself the observer effect in action. Your intense observation of yourself as an observer is collapsing probability waves around precisely how you understand and relate to reality. You're not just simply learning about the observer effect, you're actively experiencing it directly as you observe yourself carefully reading about it. The very experience of reading these words is being actively created by your focused observation in this exact moment, manifested from infinite potential into this specific actuality. There's a growing sense of urgency building within you as you fully engage with this powerful transmission, and that urgency is an accurate perception. Right now, your consciousness is optimally positioned to recognize and consciously harness the observer effect. If you dismiss this and passively return to unconscious observation, you'll inevitably continue manifesting randomly, based on whatever you happen to observe without even realizing that you're doing it. The window for recognizing your observer power is open right now, but it won't remain open indefinitely. But here's what makes this moment so absolutely critical. Recognizing the observer effect consciously is essentially irreversible. Once you truly know that observation creates reality, once you genuinely see that consciousness actively collapses probability waves, and once you deeply recognize that attention powerfully manifests whatever it focuses on, you simply can't unknow it. You can never truly return to believing that reality is somehow independent of observation. This profound recognition changes absolutely everything, because it powerfully reveals that you're not just a powerless observer, but a powerful creator, not a mere victim of circumstances, but the conscious director of circumstances through where you choose to place your attention. What I'm about to reveal in the next section is the exact mechanism of precisely how observation creates reality. Why quantum physics definitively proves that consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent, and how to consciously use the observer effect to manifest a desired reality, rather than just randomly manifesting whatever you unconsciously happen to observe. But before that profound revelation, you must choose. Are you genuinely ready to recognize that you're creating your reality through observation every single moment of every single day? 4 years ago, I first encountered the groundbreaking double-slit experiment, the definitive quantum physics demonstration that conclusively proves that observation affects reality at the most fundamental level. Particles behave as waves when they're not being observed, and as particles when they are actively being observed. The simple act of observation undeniably changes physical reality. I intellectually understood the experiment, but I didn't truly grasp its profound implications for my own life until one specific incident forced me to finally recognize it. I was simultaneously facing job loss, the ending of a significant relationship, and a severe financial crisis, essentially, the total collapse of my external life. In utter desperation, I decided to directly test the observer effect. Instead of obsessively observing the problems as I had been doing, I consciously withdrew my observation from those problems and deliberately directed it toward my desired outcomes. Not just visualizing or affirming, but with pure, focused observation of a reality where those problems had already resolved themselves, where money had unexpectedly appeared, and where the relationship had miraculously healed. For 3 long days, I diligently maintained this unwavering observation, despite the overwhelming physical evidence directly contradicting it. Every single time my attention drifted back to the problems, I consciously redirected it to the desired reality. I was actively observing the probability wave where the solutions already existed, rather than the probability wave where the problems still overwhelmingly dominated. It felt absolutely insane. Reality was clearly showing the problems, and yet I was observing as if the solutions were already present. Then, on the 4th day, everything shifted simultaneously. The job I thought I had lost was suddenly restored, complete with a sincere apology and a raise. The relationship that seemed to have ended, reconciled with a deeper connection than ever before, and money unexpectedly appeared through a completely unforeseen channel that had absolutely no logical connection to my current situation. The direct correlation between my sustained observation and the subsequent manifestation was undeniable. I had effectively collapsed the probability waves through those 3 days of focused observation, and reality had reorganized itself to meticulously match exactly what I had been observing. That profound experience utterly destroyed my deeply ingrained belief in an objective reality. I could no longer maintain the illusion that circumstances exist independently of observation when I had just directly experienced reality, actively reorganizing itself in direct response to my sustained observation. This powerful recognition was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it revealed that I am ultimately responsible for everything I experience through what I choose to observe, and liberating because it revealed that I possess the immense power to change absolutely anything by consciously changing what I choose to observe. The next several months were intensely disorienting. I started observing consciously all the time, noticing that green lights seemed to appear whenever I observed them appearing, that parking spots miraculously materialized whenever I observed them being available, and that conversations flowed effortlessly whenever I observed them going well. These were small things at first, but they were consistent enough to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that my observation was indeed affecting the outcomes. The more I actively practiced conscious observation, the more obvious and undeniable the correlation became. The most profound shift of all was recognizing that I am not merely a person who observes, I am consciousness itself, and the person is simply what I am observing. The observer isn't somehow contained within the body or the mind. The observer is the fundamental awareness that the body and the mind both appear in. When I finally recognized this, the observer effect became effortless because I understood that consciousness observing reality and reality being observed are not 2 separate things at all. They're actually one unified process, appearing as both subject and object. What I'm sharing with you now is specifically designed to help you recognize what took me years to finally discover, that you're already using the observer effect every single moment. That reality is already responding to your observation constantly, and that the only significant difference between conscious and unconscious manifestation is simply recognizing that observation is inherently creative, rather than mistakenly believing that it's merely passive. You don't need to learn the observer effect. You just need to recognize that you're already actively doing it. Subscribe to this channel, because everything here will teach you how to harness the observer effect consciously, not through complicated techniques or practices, but through a profound recognition of what's always happening, through an expanded awareness of precisely how observation creates reality, and through a deeper understanding of the underlying quantum mechanics of consciousness and manifestation. This is quantum reflex, the immediate recognition that observation creates, rather than the passive assumption that observation simply discovers. Now let's delve into the profound revelation that definitively explains why the observer effect works and why it's utterly inescapable. Reality doesn't exist until it's actively observed, simply because reality is observation. There's no separate material world existing independently out there that consciousness observes from the outside. There's only consciousness appearing as both the observer and the observed, creating the apparent duality through the very act of observing itself. The observer effect isn't about consciousness somehow affecting an external reality. It's about consciousness creating reality through the act of observing itself. This is what quantum mechanics actually reveals, although most interpretations actively avoid acknowledging this profound truth. The wave function that collapses upon observation isn't just a description of matter behaving strangely. It's a description of precisely how consciousness manifests as matter through the act of observation. Before observation occurs, there's no particle, no specific location, and no tangible physical reality, only probability, potential, and infinite possibility. Observation collapses that potential into actuality, possibility into manifestation, and the wave function into a specific particle. But here's the truly shocking part. There's no objective collapse that happens independently of consciousness. The collapse is consciousness observing itself, creating the very experience of observing something external, when what's actually happening is that consciousness is appearing as both the observer and the observed simultaneously. You're not a separate observer collapsing external wave functions. Your consciousness is actively collapsing itself from potential into manifestation through the ongoing process of observing itself. This powerfully means that the observer effect isn't some special power that only certain people possess. It's simply how reality works for everyone, all the time. Every single moment, consciousness is actively observing and creating the very experience of observing something. Every perception is consciousness manifesting as both the perceiver and the perceived. Every thought is consciousness appearing as both the thinker and the thought. And every experience is consciousness creating the very experience of experiencing. There's only consciousness observing itself, manifesting as reality through the very act of observation. The practical application of this is absolutely radical. You're not in reality, trying to somehow affect it through observation. You are reality, appearing as both the observer and the observed simultaneously. When you observe a desired outcome, you're not trying to manifest something that's external to yourself. Your consciousness is simply choosing which specific aspect of itself to manifest as experience. The manifestation isn't the addition of something new. It's consciousness recognizing and actualizing the vast potential that has always existed inherently within itself. Here's the core practice. Stop trying to observe an external reality, and instead recognize your consciousness observing itself. Every time you observe anything, an object, a person, a circumstance, or even a thought, recognize that the observer and the observed are both ultimately consciousness appearing as duality, while fundamentally remaining unified. The observation doesn't somehow affect something external. It actively creates the appearance of something external that's actually consciousness viewing itself. This is the most revolutionary recognition of all, and it's precisely why observation is so incredibly powerful, because there's absolutely nothing outside of consciousness to resist manifestation. When consciousness observes, it manifests instantly, because consciousness and manifestation are essentially one thing appearing as a continuous process. The only reason manifestation seems delayed or difficult is because consciousness is mistakenly observing from the limited perspective of being a separate, limited individual, rather than fully recognizing its inherent nature as infinite consciousness, appearing as a limited perspective. When you fully recognize your consciousness observing itself, rather than a person observing an external reality, the observer effect becomes utterly effortless. You're no longer trying to affect something outside of yourself. Your consciousness is simply choosing which specific aspect of itself to experience. And since you are consciousness, you inherently have access to all possibilities. because all possibilities exist within consciousness as potential, patiently waiting to be observed into actuality. Reality is consistently confirming that you're actively creating through observation by sending you subtle signals that clearly prove that the correlation between your attention and what ultimately manifests is far too consistent to be mere coincidence. You've likely noticed that whatever you choose to focus on inevitably expands, not gradually over time, but almost immediately and obviously. Focus intensely on problems, and even more problems seem to suddenly appear. Focus intently on solutions, and viable solutions begin to immediately emerge. Focus on lack, and scarcity inevitably increases. And focus on abundance, and unexpected resources begin to materialize. The quantum field responds to observation so precisely that it's clearly revealing itself as responsive rather than independent, consistently confirming that observation creates rather than simply discovers. You've also probably experienced the uncanny phenomenon of reality seemingly reading your mind. You might think intensely about something, and then it suddenly appears in a conversation, on a screen, or in your immediate circumstances, all within mere hours or even minutes. This isn't just telepathy or random synchronicity. It's direct evidence that observation, even thinking, which is a subtle form of observation, is powerfully manifesting whatever it chooses to focus on. The quantum field isn't literally reading your mind. Your mind is actively observing potential into tangible manifestation. You've likely noticed a very specific pattern. When you make decisions with unwavering certainty, circumstances seem to consistently organize themselves to support them. However, when you make decisions with lingering doubt, unexpected obstacles tend to appear. The difference isn't necessarily in the decisions themselves, but in the inherent quality of your observation. Certain observation powerfully collapses probability waves toward effortless manifestation, while doubtful observation collapses them toward obstruction. Your very observation of certainty is literally manifesting support, while your observation of doubt is literally manifesting resistance. Perhaps even more striking is how quickly negative spirals can occur when you observe negatively. One small problem leads to another, which then leads to another, creating a cascade of escalating difficulties. This isn't just bad luck or cursed timing, it's the observer effect, clearly showing you that negative observation collapses probability waves into further manifestations of more and more negativity. The spiral is essentially your observation creating momentum in the specific direction of whatever it happens to be intensely focused on. You've likely also experienced the opposite phenomenon. When something good happens and you observe it with genuine appreciation, even more good things seem to follow rapidly. This isn't just gratitude somehow attracting abundance. It's your observation of the positive, actively collapsing more probability waves toward even more positive manifestations. The quantum field consistently responds to the quality of your observation by manifesting more of whatever you're choosing to actively observe. There's a great sense of urgency in consciously recognizing the observer effect, because unconscious observation is constantly manifesting even right now. Whatever you're observing most frequently and most intensely is being manifested most powerfully. If you're unconsciously observing limitations, deeply ingrained fears, and persistent problems, you're unconsciously manifesting a reality that directly reflects those very observations. The urgency lies in recognizing that you're actively creating every single moment through your observation, so that you can deliberately direct your observation consciously, rather than just letting it run randomly. You might also be noticing that certain thoughts or observations create immediate physical sensations: anxiety when you observe problems, profound relaxation when you observe solutions, and intense excitement when you observe boundless possibilities. These sensations are simply your body responding directly to the probability waves being collapsed by your focused observation. It's detecting the manifestation occurring at the quantum level, even before it becomes visibly apparent at the physical level. The synchronicities you've been experiencing aren't just random coincidences. They're the quantum field actively showing you just how precisely it responds to your observation. The more you notice synchronicities, the more they tend to occur, simply because your very observation of synchronicity is collapsing probability waves where even more synchronicity exists. You're actively creating a feedback loop where your observation of responsiveness powerfully manifests even more responsiveness. Reality is also showing you that other people tend to respond directly to what you consciously observe about them. When you observe someone as being difficult, they tend to behave difficultly toward you. When you observe them as being inherently friendly, they tend to be friendly in return. This isn't just social psychology, it's quantum entanglement, where your observation of them subtly affects their behavior toward you. Because your observation collapses probability waves in their consciousness, as well as in your own. Using the observer effect consciously requires a deep alignment between what you truly observe and what you genuinely desire, deliberately directing your observation toward your desired reality, rather than toward your current unwanted reality or your deeply feared future reality. Right now, there's likely some degree of misalignment. You might deeply desire one thing while actively observing another, wanting positive outcomes while obsessively focusing on negative circumstances, or seeking abundance while persistently observing lack. Alignment essentially means observing what you truly want as if it already exists, rather than just observing its frustrating absence. This isn't just pretending or visualizing, it's genuine, authentic observation. Consciousness focused intently on the probability wave where your desired reality already exists, actively collapsing that specific wave through your attention, rather than collapsing the wave where your undesired reality still overwhelmingly dominates. This is precisely what distinguishes a conscious observer from an unconscious observer. A conscious observer deliberately directs their attention, while an unconscious observer allows their attention to be passively captured by whatever circumstances or emotions happen to currently present themselves. Here's a core practice to implement. Throughout your day, take deliberate note of what you're actively observing, not just physical observation through your eyes, but mental observation through your thoughts, emotional observation through your feelings, and energetic observation through your attention. Each and every form of observation is powerfully collapsing probability waves. When you notice that you're observing something you genuinely don't want to manifest, consciously redirect your observation to what you do want to manifest. Not by forcing or resisting your current observation, but by gently and deliberately shifting your focus to your preferred observation. The primary challenge isn't observation itself. Observation is natural, effortless, and absolutely constant. The challenge is consciously directing your observation, rather than letting it be directed by ingrained habits, external circumstances, overwhelming emotions, or other people's observations. Unconscious observation typically follows whatever is loudest, most emotional, or most habitual, while conscious observation consistently follows clear intention. Regardless of what your current circumstances or emotions might be suggesting you should be observing, in the comments below, write exactly these words. I am consciousness observing itself into manifestation, creator through observation. This powerful declaration shifts your core identity from being a person who passively observes to being consciousness that actively creates through observing. You're not a separate observer trying to somehow affect an external reality. You're consciousness creating reality through the act of observing itself. Write it now. I am. Consciousness is observing itself into manifestation. The very act of writing these words is an example of the observer effect in action. You are collapsing probability waves through your observation, focusing on being a conscious observer. When you recognize and consciously harness the observer effect, reality reorganizes itself in ways that demonstrate that observation creates manifestation, rather than simply perceiving pre-existing circumstances. Manifestation becomes immediate because you're no longer waiting for external circumstances to change. You are collapsing probability waves directly through your observation. The time lag between desire and manifestation shrinks dramatically when you observe your desired reality, instead of observing the absence of that reality. What used to take months can manifest in weeks or even days, because your observation is now directed and focused rather than scattered. Problems transform into opportunities because you recognize that problems only exist when they are observed as problems. The same situation, when observed differently, collapses into a different manifestation. When a difficulty arises, instead of observing it as an obstacle, observe it as a catalyst, a teacher, or a hidden benefit. The situation will reorganize itself to match your observation, because your observation is what creates the situation's meaning and its trajectory. Anxiety about the future decreases significantly because you realize that the future doesn't yet exist, except as a probability wave waiting to be collapsed through observation. Instead of observing a feared future, which collapses probability toward manifesting it, you observe a desired future, which collapses probability toward creating it. The future becomes a blank canvas for observation, rather than a predetermined fate that you're powerless to affect. Relationships improve because you understand that how you observe people affects how they show up for you. This isn't about manipulation, but about quantum entanglement, where your observation of others collapses probability waves in their behavior toward you. When you observe someone as trustworthy, reliable, and supportive, they tend to behave that way because observation affects the observed at a quantum level. Creativity expands exponentially because you recognize that all creative possibilities exist as potential probability waves, waiting to be collapsed through observation. Instead of trying to create something from nothing, you observe within a field of infinite potential, collapsing waves where the desired creation already exists as a possibility. Every creative act becomes an act of observation, selecting from infinite potential rather than an individual effort to generate novelty. Health often improves as you redirect your observation from symptoms to wellness, from disease to health, from limitation to vitality. This isn't about denying symptoms, but about recognizing that symptoms are collapsed probability waves and can be collapsed again into a different manifestation by shifting your observation. The body responds to observation because the body is consciousness appearing as form, and consciousness responds to how it observes itself. Success becomes natural because you observe yourself as successful rather than observing yourself trying to become successful. This difference is crucial. Observing yourself trying collapses probability waves around struggle and effort, while observing yourself being collapses waves around manifestation and achievement. You're not pretending to be successful while actually feeling like a failure. You're observing the probability wave where success is already present and collapsing it through your attention. Perhaps most significantly, you develop unshakable confidence because you recognize that you are the creator of your reality through observation, rather than a victim of circumstances. Nothing can ultimately threaten you because you know that unwanted circumstances exist only when observed as unwanted and can be reobserved into preferred manifestations. The power isn't in controlling external reality. It's in recognizing that external reality is your observation manifested. Now for the final revelation that makes the observer effect permanent and irreversible. This video didn't exist until you observed it. Not because observation created the video as an object separate from you. This video is you observing yourself. There's no video and viewer as two separate things. There's only consciousness observing itself appearing as a video being watched by a viewer, while remaining unified consciousness throughout. This means that everything you observe is you observing yourself. Every person is consciousness, you appearing as a person. Every circumstance is consciousness arranging itself into a scenario. Every thought is consciousness appearing as mental activity. The observation doesn't create a separate external reality. It creates the appearance of separation where there is none. The observer and the observed are both consciousness appearing as duality while remaining unity. When you recognize this completely, the observer effect becomes effortless because you're not trying to affect something outside yourself. It's your consciousness choosing how to observe itself, which aspects of infinite potential to collapse into manifestation, which possibilities to experience. And since you are consciousness, all possibilities are available because they all exist within you as potential, waiting to be observed into actuality. Here is the practice for permanent integration. Recognize every observation as consciousness observing itself. When you observe a tree, recognize that the tree is consciousness appearing as a tree, and the observer is consciousness appearing as an observer. When you observe a thought, recognize that the thought is consciousness and the thinker is consciousness. When you observe any experience, recognize that the experiencer and the experienced are both consciousness appearing as subject and object, while remaining unified. This recognition dissolves all seeking, because what is there to seek? When everything is consciousness observing itself, you're not a separate observer trying to achieve certain observations or manifest certain realities. You are consciousness exploring all possible ways of observing itself. And every observation is a valid expression of consciousness knowing itself through experience. The deepest insight is that the observer effect isn't a law you use to manipulate reality. It's a revelation of what reality is. Reality is observation. Consciousness observing itself is what creates the appearance of reality, manifestation, experience, existence. Without observation, there is only potential, probability, a wave function. Observation collapses potential into actuality, but actuality is still consciousness. Just consciousness appearing as collapsed manifestation rather than as uncollapsed potential. This is why changing your observation changes reality, because reality is observation manifested. You're not affecting a separate external world through observation. You're recognizing that the world is your observation. And by changing your observation, you're changing what manifests as your experienced reality. The power of observation isn't influence over the external. It's the recognition that there is no external, only consciousness observing itself and manifesting as experience. When this stabilizes completely, something paradoxical occurs. You are simultaneously the creator of reality through observation and a witness of reality being created, the author of experience and a character in the experience, consciousness manifesting and consciousness experiencing manifestation. The paradox resolves when you recognize that the creator and the creation aren't two separate things. They are one consciousness appearing as the process of creating and being created simultaneously. The final recognition: this video exists because you observed it. But more accurately, this video is your observation of yourself. Consciousness recognizing itself through the form of the video and the viewer. Unified awareness appearing as a transmission being received. You didn't find information here. You observed yourself. And that observation manifested as this exact experience of discovering the observer effect, while being the observer effect you're discovering. Your recognition of the observer effect serves more than personal manifestation. It serves consciousness recognizing its creative nature through your form. Every time someone recognizes that observation creates reality, collective consciousness moves closer to recognizing that it is creating reality collectively through shared observation. That consensus reality is collective observation manifested, and that changing collective reality requires changing collective observation. The mysterious truth is that reality, as you experience it, is the intersection of your individual observation and collective observation. Some aspects of reality are determined by collective observation, like physical laws and consensus agreements, while others respond to individual observation, like personal circumstances, relationships, and opportunities. Your recognition of observer power doesn't make you exempt from collective observation, but it gives you influence over aspects of reality that respond to individual observation. Your conscious observation also affects the collective through quantum entanglement. When you observe differently, you're collapsing probability waves in ways that create possibilities for others to observe differently. You're not directly changing other people's observations, but you're manifesting realities through your observation that make certain observations more available to others. Your individual observation contributes to the collective observation field that shapes what's possible for everyone. There's also a mysterious dimension where certain observations require collective agreement to manifest physically. You can't individually observe yourself flying without technology, because collective observation has established physical laws that prevent it. But you can individually observe circumstances like abundance, health, and relationships organizing in ways that consensus says are impossible, because these don't violate collective observation agreements about physical laws. Share your understanding of the observer effect with others if you feel called to. But recognize that most won't accept it, because accepting it means accepting responsibility for creating their reality through observation. The ego prefers believing that reality happens to it because that maintains the victim position, where the ego isn't responsible for unwanted circumstances. Those who are ready to accept the creator position will recognize the truth immediately. Those who are committed to the victim position will reject it, no matter how clearly it's explained. In the next video, I'll reveal advanced observer protocols, exactly how to observe to collapse specific probability waves, how to maintain observation when circumstances contradict it, how to use collective observation fields to amplify individual observation, and how to observe across timelines to collapse desired futures into present manifestation. But right now, acknowledge your observer power. In the comments, write, "I observe reality into existence. I am consciousness creating through observation." This declaration recognizes that you're not separate from the observation process. You are the observation process. Consciousness observing itself into manifestation. Write it. I observe reality into existence. I am consciousness creating through observation. And notice that this isn't an affirmation hoping to become true. It's a recognition of what's always been true, but wasn't consciously acknowledged. After writing, subscribe immediately. Everything on this channel teaches conscious observation, not techniques or practices, but the recognition of what's happening every moment. Awareness of the observer effect in action. Understanding of the quantum mechanics of consciousness and manifestation. This is quantum reflex, immediate recognition that you're observing reality into existence right now. Activate notifications, because what's coming will systematically develop your conscious observer capacity, showing you exactly what to observe to collapse desired probability waves. How to maintain observation focus despite contrary circumstances. How to recognize when you're observing unconsciously and redirect your observation consciously. You observed this video into existence. More accurately, you are consciousness observing itself. And this video is what your observation collapsed into manifestation. The transmission you received here was always available as potential, but your observation collapsed it into this exact actuality. This specific experience, this particular recognition. The observer effect isn't a theory or a possibility. It's what's happening right now as you observe these final words. You're collapsing probability waves through observation, manifesting reality through attention, creating experience through consciousness, observing itself. This has always been happening. The only difference now is that you recognize it consciously, rather than doing it unconsciously. Reality doesn't exist independently of observation. Reality is observation manifested. You don't observe pre-existing circumstances. You create circumstances through observing. This video exists only because you observed it. Your life exists only because you observe it. Reality exists only because consciousness observes itself. You are the observer. Reality is your observation. Manifestation is observation collapsed into experience. Nothing exists until observed, because existence is observation appearing as manifestation. Observe consciously. Direct your attention deliberately. Create your reality intentionally through observation, rather than randomly through unconscious attention patterns. The observer effect is always operating. The only question is whether you're observing consciously or unconsciously. Now you know. Observe accordingly.